Good evening, everyone. My name is Cassie, and I'm a reference librarian here at Westerly Library in Wilcox Park. And I want to thank you for joining us for our final program in our three-part native plant series presented by Tim Wachtman of Plantscapes of New England. So this one is Enjoying Your Native Landscape. If you missed the first two programs in the series, you can view the recordings on our Westerly Library in Wilcox Park YouTube channel. And I want to thank Tim for joining us today. Tim is a biologist by training and profession with over 25 years experience as a research scientist and certification in secondary science education. He's a lifelong gardener and plant enthusiast, and he honed his skills in plant selection, design, pest and disease control, and ecological gardening approaches as a manager for many years in the region's largest garden center. He continually expands his knowledge through research, attending science-based landscape and gardening conferences, and exploring botanic gardens and natural habitats in New England and throughout the country. His areas of special interest and expertise are ecological restoration and landscape design with native plants and indoor gardening with tropical plants, especially orchids. Tim also has an active event schedule promoting ecological landscaping practices and environmental engagement to local residents. He's an active member and supporter of the Society for Ecological Restoration, the Native Plant Trust, the Berkshire Botanical Garden, the Arnold Arboretum in Boston, and the Fairchild Tropical Botanical Garden in Miami. So with that, I am going to turn things over to Tim. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, thank you again to Cassie for hosting this series and Westerly Library for sponsoring. And I'll begin by again going to the Plantscapes website, which is located at plantscapesne.com. And if you scroll to the bottom of the homepage, there'll be a menu bar with lots of links in it, which I encourage you to explore at your convenience. But the one that I want to highlight right now is the notes link, which will take you to a list of presentations. If you look up tonight's talk, Enjoying Your Native Landscape, you can click on the notes link, and that will take you to my speaker notes, which has all of the books and links and plant names and such that I'll be talking about tonight, so that you won't have to bother with taking a lot of notes. Everything should be in the speaker notes. Okay, and with that, I will move over to my slides. Okay, and tonight I'm going to be talking about enjoying your native landscape. In the first installment of this series, I talked about the major motivation for doing ecological gardening and ecological landscaping, being the conservation and support of biodiversity. And knowing that you're supporting biodiversity is an enormous set opportunity for enjoyment, because we're not only supporting our own well-being in the process, we're also supporting the well-being of future generations as well. Another thing that I talked about is that ecological landscapes require a lot fewer inputs of time, effort, and resources, which means you can spend a lot more of your time and energy really enjoying the landscape, observing who's out there and learning about what they're up to. In the second talk in the series, which was planting for native pollinators, I provided a brief taste of the enormous diversity of native pollinators out there. And I also tried to give you a sense of how to support their entire life cycle by building habitat for them. In this presentation, I'm going to assume you've already been encouraging or adding natives in your landscape, or at least won over to the concept of ecological gardening. So I'll discuss some of the many ways that you can engage with your native landscape and derive endless pleasures from that in the process. One source of enjoyment is engaging your creativity in designing a native landscape. And what I suggest when you're doing this is to be as creative as you'd like to be, but to have a plan. And you don't need to go out and buy expensive, complicated landscape design software to do this. A very simple sketch on some graph paper to kind of keep things in scale is really all you need to do to organize your ideas and get them down on paper. So make a sketch to scale. And then the next thing I would suggest is to develop a plant list. You can do this in a notebook or maybe in a spreadsheet. But over time, as you come up with ideas and see things out in other landscapes or through reading, capture your ideas in the plant list. And as you're going out to nurseries or shopping for plants, you can use the plant list as your shopping list. When you are sourcing your plants, though, I strongly suggest that you prioritize putting in trees first, and then shrubs, and then the smaller perennials and ground covers. Because if you start putting in a lot of the smaller things, filling a bed with perennials and ground covers, and then go in later and decide to put a tree in, you're just going to be trampling and having to work around the smaller things that you'd already put in. So start big and move to the smaller things, and it'll make your work a lot easier. I'd also ask you to keep in mind the keystones and specialists that I talked about previously. The keystones being plants that have an outsized ecological role. So they support a large number and diversity of insects, and also providing plants for the specialists that have a very limited host range, especially butterflies and moths that may only feed on one or a few types of plants. Okay, this is an image of a design that couldn't be more rigid and controlled. But even taking a design like this, if you use your imagination and some flexibility, you could think about modifying this to make it a much more ecologically beneficial situation. So some simple things like taking these squares and making it a 4-season garden where you have a spring, summer, fall, winter interest garden, converting some of these boxwoods and privets to native plants that are going to support a lot more biodiversity. You could keep the overall structure if you'd like, but just you could start easily plugging a much greater diversity of plants into a design like this. When you're designing a landscape, I'm not here to tell you that you have to pull out all of your exotics and replace everything with native plants. If you were to look at my yard, there's a lot of plants that I have in my landscape that are not natives, like my Japanese umbrella pine that I just went out and looked at this afternoon. I love its 4-season interest, and I looked in there today, and I've got my front yard robin's nest in there with 4 eggs. So even though a plant may not be native, it can still provide benefits to your landscape. And if there's something that you really enjoy, by all means, include that in your design. The overall message is, though, the more native plants you put in, the more interest you're going to have in your landscape and the more ecological benefits it's going to provide. Keep in mind that you need to work at your own pace. Sometimes our plans kind of bigger than what we can manage in reality. And it's much better as an approach to take little bite-sized pieces that you can establish plantings so that they're successful. The rate limiting step on most designs is actually how much time you have to water the plants while they're establishing themselves. Because even though they're native plants, they do need to develop their root system before you can take advantage of their drought resistant capacities and things like that. Also realize that the landscapes are going to change over time, that especially as trees grow, they're going to create shade in areas that have been in full sun before. So the plant palette may need to change with those sort of considerations. If a tree comes down or is no longer in the landscape, that's going to open up a window for more light and possibility for other plants to come in that wouldn't have been able to thrive there before. And also keep an eye out for natural contributions. So as you reduce your turf grass, for example, and allow some rewilding to go on, perhaps, nature is going to give you lots of suggestions for things that will work well in various areas. For example, in my own landscape behind my garage last year, I had a sumac that started to grow, and it is just an ideal location for that plant. Even if it starts to kind of colonize that area of my property, I'll be perfectly happy to see that plant grow there. And it's a plant that has a lot of ecological benefit to it. So if we show a little bit of restraint and see what nature is suggesting to us, we'll often find plants popping up that work really well in our landscapes. So another way to enjoy native plants is the educational value and edification that they can provide us. So learning the names and habits of the various insects and birds and plants that start appearing in your environment is a very satisfying activity. Learn their names and habits, but also their nesting and feeding preferences, who their friends and enemies are, and also their life cycles and behaviors. And once you start to tune into those features of your environment, I think you'll find it's very, very satisfying, and you really become a part of that environment as well as you understand it more and more. A very helpful resource for doing that, for educating ourselves in terms of natural history, are the Stokes Nature Guides. Don and Lillian Stokes have devoted their lifetime to researching and teaching about the natural history of native landscapes. And they have a whole series of books focused on different aspects of the environment, from wildflower books that can help you place the right plant in the right place in your landscape, guides on insects and a wonderful 3-volume set on bird behavior. And what these books do is take you beyond just identifying different plants and animals, but really to understand their natural history and their behaviors. And once you're keyed into those behaviors, you'll begin to see a lot more of the things that are going on in your environment. And it will just draw you in, and you want to learn more and more over time. And these Stokes guides are a great way of reinforcing the interrelations and dependencies between the plants and the insects and the birds. So help us as humans to be more engaged and a part of this landscape too, and a beneficial part of the ecosystem. Another great way to learn about natural history is with the Inaturalist app. And this is a collaboration between California Academy of Sciences and National Geographic, where they put together this platform that contributes to a huge global database. So as you're using the identification tools in Inaturalist, which is as easy as taking a picture of something that you see in the environment, it captures the location and all the information that you put in about that plant, and that gets uploaded to a big database that ecologists and conservationists can use in their research and planning efforts. It also has a social network aspect to it, where you can connect with other professional and amateur naturalists and get involved with different projects and learn a lot from others as well. So I highly encourage you to try this out if you haven't, because there's a lot of ways that you can benefit from it, and it's a way to support science as well. A very popular aspect of, or a way for people to enjoy their native plants is through putting edible natives into their landscape. And there's a whole lot of things that you can do in this area. And I've tried to include a few examples in this slide. For example, planting wild bergamot and New Jersey tea. You can create your own blend of Earl Grey if you like. Ostrich fern is one of our largest native ferns. Creates wonderful accents in the landscape, especially in partial shade areas. But as the fern is just leafing out in the spring, it produces these fiddleheads, which are edible. They're great as a fresh addition to salads, or you can stir fry them. Once you get a good colony of this ostrich fern going, it will create a good supply of these fiddleheads. There are a lot of wild berries and grapes. Pawpaw is becoming very popular. There are a number of varieties of these that you can plant. They do require a bit of space and they tend to colonize, but if you've got a corner of your property where you don't mind having some things that'll spread out a bit, this is a great choice. There's hazelnuts, which not only provide delicious nuts for us to eat, but the plant also has wonderful fall foliage. And a book I'll recommend that can help get you into these Edible Natives is Native Plants for New England Gardens. Dan Jaffe, one of the co-authors on this book, is a real native edible enthusiast. And in this book, he gives a lot of suggestions on edible natives you can bring into your landscape, how to place them and maintain them for best effect too. A couple things that I'll say in this area is that when you plant these things, just keep in mind that especially a lot of the fruits and nuts are going to be attracted to a lot of critters out there. So, and they tend to get to things before we think they're really ripe. So resign yourself to sharing, or you're going to have to find some ways of netting the bushes or trees so you can enjoy some of these things if you want to harvest them. Also keep in mind that some of these plants that we might consider edibles, the produce from them needs some sort of preparation. For example, the elderberry, all of the parts of this plant, if they're eaten without cooking, are poisonous. But if you prepare the elderberries in the proper way, cook them properly, then those toxic properties are no longer an issue. Another good book that I've put in the speaker notes for finding out about the safety issues in these plants is a Peterson Field Guide to Edible Wild Plants. And it does a very good job of describing what the potential hazards might be and how to cook things properly so that those things aren't an issue. So it's like collecting, mushrooms in the wild. You have to educate yourself a little bit in order to do it safely. But there's lots of resources out there that can help you do that. I mentioned citizen science a little bit already, but on the website, I have a page where I list a large number of efforts that you can get involved in, which focus on birds or frogs, butterflies, bumblebees, almost every imaginable plant or animal that's out there has some sort of citizen science connection now. And on these links, some of these projects are still active. Some have kind of wound up in terms of their data collection, but the websites are able to show you what's been learned through these projects and are another source of education. I try to collect these citizen science projects whenever I come across them, but if any of you have other ones that you're aware of or come across that have kind of an ecological orientation to them, please shoot me an email and I'll try to include those in my list. There are also other ways to kind of engage with native landscapes. And one that I like to promote is Doug Tallamy's Homegrown National Park. This is a grassroots movement, really, to take all of the private property that's out there, which is a huge potential ecological resource, whether it's residential properties or business properties or public spaces, and try to convert as much of this as possible, as quickly as possible, to ecologically beneficial landscapes. Doug Tallamy has been promoting this for a while. His book, Nature's Best Hope, is kind of a manifesto on why and how to do this. I'm going to be giving another presentation on June 21st, which will talk in much greater detail about this. I encourage you to go to the events page on the Plantscapes website to get a link to that for more information. And the title of the talk will be Becoming an Inaturalist in Homegrown National Park. So I'll be able to give you a lot more on that effort in greater depth. There are also many opportunities for nature education, either in our local area here or within a short drive or maybe online. And a lot of these things are geared to young people as a way to get them engaged with the natural world. But there are tours and webinars and visitor guides and all sorts of information from these sort of, and they're a great way to learn a lot more about natural landscapes. This being a library audience, I'm sure there's a lot of avid readers out there. Once you start getting into this area of native landscaping, there are many books out there that you can delve into to learn more about the topic. A great place to start is with Doug Tallamy's books. I suggest Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope as a good place to start. And there's some other ones listed here that I've found very helpful as well. But as you get into this literature, I think you'll just get drawn deeper and deeper into it. And some of it actually goes back almost 2 centuries. So there's a really deep lineage of literature around this topic that's really incredibly interesting, I find. Another way of enjoying these landscapes is to go and look at other places where they've really been well developed. And we're fortunate around here to have a lot of opportunities to explore these different gardens and landscapes. In our own backyard, the native plant collection at Connecticut College is a wonderful place. It's open year-round, free to the public, and they have a really nice website that's been developed in conjunction with the landscape that you can use to locate plants and learn about plant combinations and different parts of the arboretum when you visit. I've spoken a lot about Garden in the Woods already. So I'll just mention that this is the headquarters for the Native Plant Trust, which is the leading native plant conservation organization in our country. And Garden in the Woods is the headquarters for the Native Plant Trust. And it's a short drive away and well worth making the trip to see. The Arnold Arboretum in Boston has been making a big effort in recent years to rewild a lot of their extensive landscape, which is in the heart of Boston. So if you go and visit this, you can kind of see this change developing in action. And they have a lot of classes and tours and things that are available as well that will help you learn a lot more about native landscapes. And finally, the Berkshire Botanical Garden up in Stockbridge, Mass, does a wonderful job in their display gardens of integrating native plants into some very formal garden settings. So depending on the sort of designs that you may be thinking about, the Berkshire Botanical Garden is another great place to get ideas. They have also started to build an extensive meadow system there, and it's in the very early process. So if that's something that you're interested in exploring, it's a great example of how to go about that and see what the possibilities are. And I'll kind of wrap up this talk by suggesting that as you add native plants to your environment and build a more ecological landscape, take the time to go out and visit your landscape on a daily basis if possible. Because if you go out at different times during the day, different times during the year, the landscape is very dynamic and it'll be changing from day to day, hour to hour, season to season. And the more often you visit, the more you're going to understand and observe what's going on out there. Also, use your native landscape as an opportunity to unplug. Much of our lives now are tied to our screens, and putting the screen down for a while and going out and sitting on a bench in your garden is a great way to reconnect with nature and take a break from some of the virtual life that we're very much tied up with today. Finally, if you have native plants in your landscape, make an effort to share them with family, friends, and neighbors, because we all have things that we're interested in. And if we share the plants that we're putting into our gardens and all of the insects and birds that those are inviting in, if we make those things available to other people, they'll be able to enjoy them as well. Especially if you can share those things with young people. If you can get them off their screens for a few minutes to look at a flower or an insect or watch a bird's behavior, you may be able to spark a lifelong interest in nature that will just continue to propagate. So with that, I thank you for your time and your attention and your interest in this subject. I hope you'll go visit the Plantscapes website. I've plugged a lot of resources in there. I try to keep everything up to date, and pretty much everything I've said in this series is available in the website. And I hope that you'll utilize that as you're thinking about building your own ecological landscapes. And with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take those now.